A carriage stops in front of a wooden homestead. Dust settles. A man steps forward, hat in hand, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He's been waiting 6 months for this exact moment. 6 months of letters to a woman named Catherine. A woman who promised gentleness, who understood his shyness, who didn't mind that he'd never touched a woman before. The door to the carriage opens, but what steps down isn't Catherine. What steps down is a woman nearly 2 heads taller than him. Her shoulders are broader than his. She's wearing patchy, worn clothing and carrying a single, battered case. She looks down at him. He looks up at her. Neither of them speaks. But in that silence, something impossible has just begun. And here is the thing. Neither of them knows it yet, but this wasn't an accident. Someone arranged this deliberately. Someone who stands to profit from a lonely rancher looking weak and vulnerable. And that someone is watching from the hills right now, waiting to see if his plan will work. Cormac Holloway stood frozen on his own porch. The letter from Catherine was still folded in his shirt pocket, burning against his chest. The carefully rehearsed greeting he had practiced for days died in his throat. The woman who had stepped down from the carriage wasn't just tall. She was a force of nature. Her legs were longer than his entire torso. Her arms were corded with muscle that showed through the fringe leather of her clothing. Dark hair fell past her shoulders like a curtain of midnight. And when she turned those deep brown eyes on him, he didn't feel like a suitor. He felt like prey. The driver didn't even get down. He just tossed her case into the dirt and snapped the reins without a word, clearly wanting distance from whatever situation he'd just delivered. The horses kicked up dust as they pulled away, leaving only silence and the wind moving through the dry grass. Cormac's nearest neighbor was half a day's ride away. The town where he'd posted his advertisement was 3 hours south. There was no one to witness this moment except the 2 of them and the empty territory stretching in every direction. She didn't move. She just stood there, case at her feet, studying him with an expression he couldn't read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was something deeper, something that looked painful, like resignation. He knew he should say something, anything. But his tongue felt thick, his mind blank. He'd prepared for shyness. He'd prepared for awkwardness. He hadn't prepared for this. He hadn't prepared for the way she seemed to take up all the space in his vision, blocking out the vast western sky behind her. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower than he expected. Smoother. "You're Cormac Holloway." It wasn't a question. He nodded anyway, throat dry. "I'm Ayanna." She picked up her case with one hand, lifting it like it weighed nothing at all. "There's been a mistake." The words should have brought relief. They should have given him an exit, a way to explain that yes, obviously, there had been some terrible confusion with the agency, that she was meant for someone else, somewhere else. But instead, what came out of his mouth was, "Where were you supposed to go?" Something flickered across her face, a shadow. Nowhere. She looked past him at the homestead, at the small barn, at the 3 horses grazing near the creek. "This was the address I was given, but you were expecting someone else." "Catherine," he heard himself say. Her name was Catherine. She was supposed to be small, delicate, white, everything you are not. He trailed off, because how could he finish that sentence without sounding like a monster? Ayanna's jaw tightened just slightly. She'd heard the unspoken words anyway. "I can wait until morning," she said. "Then I'll leave." "Wait." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. She paused, one foot already on the first porch step. And that's when he saw it. The way her shoulders were too rigid. The way she held her head too high. It was the way someone stands when they're used to being rejected but refuse to show it, breaks them. "Where will you go?" he asked. She didn't answer. And in that silence, Cormarmac understood something terrible. She had nowhere to go. Catherine had somewhere. Catherine was safe in a city somewhere. But Ayanna had only this wrong address and a case that probably held everything she owned in the world. The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky orange and bloody red. In an hour it would be dark. In 2 hours, the temperature would drop hard and fast, the way it did out here in the open territory. He thought about sending her away. He thought about the scandal if anyone found out. He thought about how small he felt standing next to her. How inadequate. How visibly, laughably wrong they looked together. Then he thought about her standing in the dark with nowhere to go. "There's a room in the back," he said quietly. "It's not much, but it's clean. You can stay tonight. In the morning, we'll figure something out." Ayanna turned to look at him fully then. For the first time, something in her expression softened. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something more complicated, something that looked like she was seeing him. Really seeing him. Maybe for the first time since she'd stepped down from that carriage. "One night," she said. "One night," he agreed. But as she walked past him into his home, her arm brushing his shoulder and making him feel the difference between them in a way that sent heat through his chest, Cormarmac had the distinct feeling that one night was a lie they were both telling themselves. What he didn't see was the figure on horseback in the distant hills. The figure was watching through a spyglass. He was smiling. Everything was going exactly as planned. The morning light came harsh through the window. Cormarmac woke to the smell of coffee. This was wrong. He always made his own coffee, alone, in silence. He sat up too fast, heart racing. He remembered where he was. He remembered what had happened yesterday. He remembered her. When he stepped into the main room, Ayanna was standing by the stove. Her back was to him, hair falling loose down her spine. She'd rolled up her sleeves, and he could see the muscles in her forearms shifting as she worked. The coffee pot sat on the heat, and she'd already set out 2 cups. She hadn't touched anything else. She hadn't searched his things or made herself comfortable. Just coffee. Just this small gesture that somehow felt bigger than it should. She turned when she heard his footstep. "I'll leave after breakfast." No greeting, no softness. Just that same resignation from yesterday, like she'd already written the ending to this story before it began. Cormarmac crossed to the table and pulled out a chair. His hands were shaking slightly, and he hated that she could probably see it. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She poured coffee into both cups with steady hands. "You paid for a bride. I'm not what you ordered." The bluntness of it hit him like a fist. He wanted to argue. But what could he say? That he didn't mind? That would be a lie. He did mind. He minded that everyone who saw them together would laugh. He minded that they would know immediately that he wasn't man enough for a woman like her. He minded that she made him feel like a boy playing at ranching instead of someone who'd worked this land for 5 years. But he also minded the thought of her leaving with nowhere to go. "Where will you go?" he asked again. The same question from yesterday. Ayanna set the coffee pot down with more force than necessary. The clatter rang in the small room. "Why do you keep asking that?" "Because you keep not answering." She stared at him for a long moment, and then he saw something crack in her expression, something that looked like pain. "My people cast me out. The agency that sent me here took everything I had for the placement fee. I have no family, no home, no tribe." Each word came out harder than the last. "Does that answer your question?" Cormarmac felt the air leave his lungs, cast out. The words carried a weight he could barely imagine. He knew what it meant to be alone, but he'd chosen his solitude. She'd had hers forced on her. "Why?" The question came out before he could stop it. Her jaw tightened. "Because I'm too tall, too strong, too different." She looked away, toward the window. "Apache women are supposed to be one way. I was another. The men were afraid of me. The women didn't trust me, so they sent me away. She picked up her coffee cup, holding it between both hands like she needed something to grip. The agency promised me a new start, a husband who wouldn't care about my height or my strength. They lied. I didn't know, Cormac said quietly. Of course you didn't. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the challenge in her eyes. You wanted Catherine, small, gentle, easy to manage, someone who'd make you feel like the man you're supposed to be. The accusation stung, because it was true. He had wanted exactly that, someone who wouldn't make him feel inadequate just by standing next to him. Yes, he admitted, because lying seemed worse than the truth. I wanted that. Something shifted in her expression. Not anger, something closer to respect, like his honesty had surprised her. Then we agree, she said. I'll finish this coffee and leave. But before Cormac could respond, before he could figure out what he wanted to say to that, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the morning air. Multiple horses, coming fast. Ayana moved to the window with a speed that startled him. Her whole body changed from tense conversation to something else, something predatory. You expecting company? No. Cormac joined her at the window. He looked out at the 5 riders approaching his homestead. He recognized 3 of them, neighbors from the settlement to the south. The other 2 he'd never seen before. But the lead rider, he knew him. It was Silas Greer, the agent who'd arranged his correspondence with Catherine, the man who'd taken his money and promised him a bride. And judging by the expression on Silas's face as he looked between Cormac and the woman standing at his window, this wasn't a social visit. That's the man who sent me here, Ayana said, her voice dropping to something dangerous. Cormac felt his stomach drop. That's the man who was supposed to send me Catherine. They looked at each other, the truth settling between them like a heavy stone. They had both been played. The question was, why? Silas Greer dismounted with the confidence of a man who owned every space he entered. His coat was expensive, his boots were polished, his smile was wide and false. The 4 men with him stayed on their horses, hands resting conspicuously near their belts. Not a friendly visit, a show of force. Cormac stepped onto the porch before Silas could reach the door. Ayana stayed inside, but he could feel her presence at the window, watching. Mr. Greer. Wasn't expecting you. No, I imagine you weren't. Silas's eyes flicked past him to the window, to the shadow of the woman behind the glass. So, you got your delivery. Hope she's everything you hoped for. The mockery in his voice was thin, but present. Cormac felt heat rise in his chest. There's been a mistake. The woman you sent isn't Catherine. No mistake. Silas pulled a paper from his coat. He unfolded it with deliberate slowness. Contract says I deliver you a bride. Says nothing about which bride. You paid for a woman willing to marry you. I delivered one. He gestured toward the house. Strong as an ox, that one. Good for working the land. Should be grateful. One of the riders behind him laughed, a sound that made Cormac's jaw tighten. I paid for Catherine, Cormac said, keeping his voice level. The woman I corresponded with for 6 months. Catherine changed her mind. Silas shrugged. Happens. But business is business, Holloway. I fulfilled my end. You got your bride. He paused. Now, about this land. There it was, the real reason for the visit. Cormac had known it was coming. He had felt it in his gut since yesterday, when he'd seen that figure watching from the hills. The land's not for sale. Didn't say it was. Silas folded the paper and tucked it away. But see, there's some folks interested in this particular stretch of territory. Creek runs through it. Good water source. And you? Well, you're just one man trying to work it alone. Seems like a waste. Still not for sale. Silas's smile thinned. You sure about that? because word's going to spread pretty quick that you've got yourself an Apache woman living under your roof. Settlement folks. They don't take kindly to that sort of thing. Might make life difficult for you. Is that a threat? Just an observation. Silas turned to leave, then paused. Though I will say, if something were to happen to you out here, all alone with nobody to verify what went down, well, that land would go up for auction real fast, and accidents happen all the time on a ranch. The riders shifted in their saddles. One of them rested his hand more obviously on the revolver at his hip. Cormarmac felt the air change. This wasn't just about the land anymore. This was about control, about making sure he understood exactly how vulnerable he was. The door opened behind him. Ayanna stepped onto the porch, and the entire dynamic shifted. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just stood there, a full head taller than Cormarmac, shoulders squared, eyes locked on Silas with an intensity that made the man take an involuntary step backward. The riders' horses shifted nervously, sensing something in her that their owners were slower to recognize. "You should leave," she said. Her voice carried the kind of quiet that comes before violence. Silas recovered his composure, but Cormarmac saw the brief flicker of genuine fear. The savage speaks, how charming. He mounted his horse, looking down at them both. "You've got 3 days, Holloway. 3 days to come to your senses and sell. After that? Well, like I said, accidents happen." They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Cormarmac and Ayanna standing together on the porch. His heart was hammering. His hands were shaking again. But this time, it wasn't fear of her. It was rage at his own powerlessness. "He planned this," Ayanna said quietly. "Sent me here knowing it would cause problems, knowing it would make you weak." Cormarmac wanted to argue, but she was right. One man alone was vulnerable. One man with an Apache woman was a target. 3 days, he said. Ayanna looked at him, something calculating in her expression. "Or we give them a reason to be afraid." Before he could ask what she meant, she turned and walked back inside. Cormarmac had the distinct feeling that one night had just become something far more dangerous. The afternoon brought work that couldn't wait. Fence posts needed replacing on the north pasture. Cormarmac couldn't afford to let the ranch fall apart just because his world had turned upside down. He expected to work alone the way he always did. But when he grabbed his tools and headed out, Ayanna followed. She didn't ask permission. She just picked up the spare hammer and walked alongside him in silence, her long stride forcing him to move faster than his usual pace. He wanted to tell her she didn't have to help, that this wasn't her responsibility. But the words died when he saw her examine the broken fence with the practiced eye of someone who understood hard work. They worked without speaking for the first hour. Cormarmac dug out the rotted posts while Ayanna carried the new ones from the pile near the barn. Each post probably weighed close to 70 pounds. She carried 2 at a time, one balanced on each shoulder, walking across the uneven ground like the weight meant nothing. He tried not to stare, tried not to feel the inadequacy burning in his chest as he struggled with the post-hole digger in the hard-packed earth. By the second hour, his hands were blistering. He'd never been particularly strong. He had always relied on patience and persistence rather than raw power. But watching Ayanna sink a new post into the ground with 3 solid strikes of the hammer made him feel like a child playing at being a man. She noticed him watching. She paused mid-swing. "You dig better than I do." It was a lie. They both knew it. But something in her voice made him look up, made him see the small kindness she was offering. She was trying to make him feel less inadequate. The gesture touched something raw in him. "You don't have to help," he said quietly. "I know." She set down the hammer and wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "But I'm here. Might as well be useful." They went back to work, but the silence between them shifted. It became less hostile, more companionable. As the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Cormac felt his shoulders relaxing in a way they hadn't since she'd arrived. "Why ranching?" Ayana asked suddenly. "If you're not built for heavy work, why choose this life?" The question should have stung, but her tone held genuine curiosity rather than mockery. Cormac paused, considering his answer. "I inherited the land from my uncle. He died with no children, left it to me because I was the only family he had left. He looked out at the territory stretching around them. I could have sold it, moved to a city, but this felt like the only place I might actually belong." "Alone," Ayana said. "Yes." He met her eyes. "Alone seemed safer than trying to fit in somewhere I'd always be wrong." She was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was Apache. My father was a trader from the east. Tall man, very tall. That's where I got my height." She picked up another post. "The tribe accepted me as a child, but when I grew taller than the men, stronger than their sons, everything changed. I wasn't one of them anymore. I was evidence of my mother's mistake." Cormac felt something twist in his chest. "That's why they cast you out." "That's why I was never really part of them to begin with." She drove the post into the ground with more force than necessary. "I thought maybe among your people, height wouldn't matter. Thought maybe I could find somewhere I fit." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Then I saw your face when I stepped off that carriage." The shame hit him like a physical blow. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She looked at him directly, and he saw something softer in her expression than before. "At least you're honest about it. Most people just stare and whisper behind my back." The sun touched the horizon, painting everything gold and red. They'd replaced 6 posts. The work was done for the day, but neither of them moved to leave. "I've never felt like I fit anywhere either," Cormac admitted. "Too small, too weak, too shy. Never enough of what I was supposed to be." Ayana studied him, and for the first time, he didn't feel judged by her gaze. "Maybe that's why Silas put us together," she said. "Two people who don't fit anywhere. Easy to exploit." Or maybe, Cormac heard himself say, "two people who don't fit anywhere might fit together." The words hung in the air between them. He couldn't believe he'd said them out loud, but looking at her face, at the way her eyes widened slightly, at the way her breath caught just barely, he didn't want to take them back. Before she could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. They both turned toward the house. Smoke was rising from the barn. Cormac ran. His heart hammered against his ribs. The horses were inside, all 3 of them. If the fire spread to the hay, they'd be trapped. He could hear them already, panicked whinnying cutting through the evening air. Ayana reached the barn first. Her longer legs ate up the distance. She didn't hesitate. She just pulled her shirt up over her nose and mouth and disappeared into the smoke pouring from the open door. Cormac followed, but the heat hit him like a physical wall. The fire had started near the back, where he kept the hay stored. Flames were climbing the wooden support beams, and the smoke was so thick he could barely see 3 feet ahead. He heard Ayana moving deeper into the barn. He heard the frightened screaming of the horses. The first horse came charging past him, wild-eyed and terrified. Ayana's hand was barely gripping its mane as she guided it toward the door. She'd released it from its stall, somehow gotten it moving despite the panic. The animal bolted into the open air. Ayana turned back into the smoke without a pause. Cormac tried to follow, but a fit of coughing doubled him over. The smoke was filling his lungs, making his eyes water, making everything blur. He heard the second horse being released. He heard Ayana's voice, low and steady, talking to the animal in words he didn't understand. Apache words. Calming words. The second horse thundered past him. That left one. He pushed deeper into the barn. He felt the heat intensifying. A support beam cracked overhead, sending sparks raining down. He saw Ayana struggling with the third horse. The animal was too panicked to move. It was rearing and striking out with its front hooves. She was trying to get close enough to release the stall door, but the horse kept driving her back. Cormarmac didn't think. He just moved. He knew this horse. He had raised it from a foal. It knew his voice. He started talking soft and low, the way he'd always talked to the animals when no one else was around. The horse's ears flicked toward him. It was still panicked, still dangerous. But something in his voice cut through the fear. He moved closer slowly, hands out. The horse allowed it, allowed him to reach the stall door, allowed him to slide the bolt free. Ayana was there instantly. She grabbed the horse's halter, using her massive strength to force its head around toward the door. The horse fought her, but she held on, muscles straining. Together, they got it moving. Got it out into the open air where it bolted away from the burning building. They stumbled out after it, both coughing, both covered in soot and ash. The barn was fully engulfed now. Flames reached toward the darkening sky. There was nothing they could do except watch it burn. Cormarmac sank to his knees in the dirt. His lungs burned. His hands shook with adrenaline. The barn was gone. The hay was gone. The tools, the equipment, everything stored inside was lost. The financial damage would set him back months, maybe longer. Ayana stood beside him, breathing hard. Soot streaked across her face. She looked like a warrior, powerful and unbreakable, while he knelt in the dirt like a man defeated. "This wasn't an accident," she said, voice rough from the smoke. Cormarmac knew she was right. The fire had started too conveniently, too soon after Silas's visit. This was the first move, the first attempt to drive him off his land. "They'll come back," he said quietly. "And next time, it'll be worse." Ayana looked down at him. He saw something fierce in her expression. "Then we make sure they regret it." She offered him her hand. He stared at it for a moment, at the strength in those fingers, at the soot and ash coating her skin. Then he took it. He let her pull him to his feet. He let himself feel how easily she lifted his weight. Standing there in front of the burning barn, their hands still clasped, Cormarmac felt something shift in his chest. She'd saved his horses. She'd run into that fire without hesitation. She had risked herself for animals that weren't even hers, for a man she'd known less than 2 days. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you risk yourself for this place? For me?" Ayana didn't let go of his hand. "Because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and didn't immediately decide I was a problem to be solved. You gave me shelter when you could have sent me away. You treated me like a person, not a mistake." She squeezed his fingers. He felt the calluses on her palm. "And because I'm tired of running from people who want to destroy me for being different." The fire crackled behind them. In the distance, Cormarmac could hear the horses settling. Safe. Alive. He looked at Ayana, really looked at her. He saw not the woman who'd ruined his plans, but the woman who had just saved everything that mattered. "Stay," he said. "Not for one night. Stay." Her eyes searched his face. "You understand what that means? Silas will use it against you. The settlement will turn on you. You'll be choosing me over everything else." "I know," Cormarmac said, and he did. But standing there with his barn burning and her hand in his, the choice felt simpler than it should have. "Stay anyway." She smiled then, small and genuine, and it changed her entire face. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was watching them. Someone who'd started the fire. Someone who'd underestimated what desperation and loneliness could build when two people who didn't fit anywhere finally found each other. The war had just begun, but they were no longer alone. They spent the next day preparing. Ayana moved through the homestead with purpose. She checked sightlines. She identified weak points. She turned the small ranch into something defensible. Cormarmac watched her work and felt useless. She was the warrior. He was just a man who talked softly to horses. By evening, the temperature had dropped. They sat outside near a small fire, neither wanting to sleep inside where smoke still lingered from the barn burning. The stars were sharp overhead. Cormarmac could hear coyotes in the distance. Ayanna sharpened a knife she'd found in the house. The blade sang against the whetstone. They'll come tomorrow or the next day. Silas won't wait long. I know. Cormarmac poked at the fire with a stick. I'm sorry you're caught in this. I chose to stay. You shouldn't have to fight my battles. She looked up from the blade. Her eyes reflected the firelight. These are my battles too now. Silas used me as a weapon against you. That makes it personal. They fell into silence. Cormarmac wanted to say something, wanted to bridge the gap between what he felt and what he could articulate. But the words wouldn't come. He'd never been good with words when they mattered. Ayanna set down the knife. You should sleep. I'll keep watch. You need rest too. I'm used to sleeping light. She stood and stretched. Cormarmac saw the long line of her body silhouetted against the stars. Something in his chest tightened. He stood too, meaning to go inside. But before he could move, Ayanna's hand shot out. She grabbed his arm, pulling him down hard. They hit the ground together just as something whistled through the air where his head had been. A rock, fist-sized. It cracked against the side of the house with enough force to chip the wood. Ayanna was on her feet instantly. She scanned the darkness. There. She pointed toward a ridge about 50 yards out. Cormarmac saw movement. 2 figures, maybe 3. Another rock came flying, this one aimed at Ayanna. She dodged it easily, but it forced her to move away from Cormarmac, and he realized with cold clarity what was happening. They were being separated, driven apart so they'd be easier to deal with individually. More rocks coming faster now. Ayanna moved with fluid grace, avoiding them, but they kept coming. Kept pushing her farther from the homestead. Cormarmac saw one of the figures break away from the ridge. He was circling around, trying to get behind her. He didn't think. He just moved. He grabbed the bucket of water they'd drawn from the creek, and he threw it on the fire, plunging them into sudden, absolute darkness. The rock throwing stopped. The attackers were confused by the loss of light. But Cormarmac knew this land. He had walked it at night more times than he could count. He moved quickly and quietly toward where he'd seen the figure circling. He used the darkness. He used the terrain. He found the man crouched behind a boulder, preparing to rush Ayanna from behind. Cormarmac didn't try to fight him. He was too small, too weak. Instead, he grabbed a handful of dirt and rocks, and he threw it hard into the man's face. The man yelped, stumbling backward, blinded. Ayanna was there in an instant, one solid strike. The man went down. The other 2 ran, disappearing into the darkness like ghosts. Ayanna turned to Cormarmac, breathing hard. You put out the fire. They were using it to see you. I took away their advantage. Something changed in her expression. Not gratitude, something deeper. She closed the distance between them in 2 strides, and suddenly her hands were on his face, tilting his head up to look at her. Her palms were warm against his skin. Her touch was gentle despite her strength. You saved me, she said, and there was wonder in her voice. You didn't fight. You didn't try to be something you're not. You just used what you had. Cormarmac's heart was hammering. She was so close. He could smell the smoke in her hair. I'm not strong like you. No, she agreed. You're smart. You see things. That's better. Then she kissed him. She leaned down and pressed her mouth to his, with a gentleness that contradicted everything about her physical presence. The kiss was soft, questioning. Cormarmac felt his entire world tilt on its axis. When she pulled back, her eyes were searching his face. Was that wrong? No, he managed, voice rough. That was perfect. She smiled, and in that moment, with the unconscious attacker at their feet and danger still lurking in the darkness, Cormarmac felt more right than he had in his entire life. We need to end this, Ayanna said, before Silas sends more than rocks. Cormarmac nodded. Something hardened in his chest. Then we take the fight to him. They rode into the settlement at midday. The sun was high. There was nowhere to hide. Cormarmac was on his smallest horse. Ayanna was walking beside him because no horse could carry her weight comfortably. People stopped and stared. Whispers followed them down the main road like a wake. Silas's office sat at the end of the street, a 2-story building that proclaimed his importance to anyone who looked. Cormarmac dismounted. He tied his horse to the post. His hands were steady. He'd been afraid yesterday. Today, he was just angry. Ayanna pushed the door open without knocking. Silas looked up from his desk. Surprise flashed across his face before he masked it with that false smile. "Holloway. Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be packing." "Came to discuss terms," Cormarmac said, walking to the center of the room. Ayanna positioned herself by the door. She blocked the exit. "You want my land? Let's talk about what that's worth." Silas leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "Finally seeing sense, are you? Smart man." He pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. "I can offer you a fair price, enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere more suitable." Cormarmac picked up the document. He read the number. It was less than half what the land was worth. "This is what you call fair? It's generous considering your situation, man, with your reputation. Living with a savage woman. You're not exactly in a strong bargaining position." Silas's smile widened. "Accept the offer, or watch everything you have burn. Your choice." "I have another option," Cormarmac said quietly. "I tell everyone in this settlement what you did, how you sent the wrong woman on purpose, how you hired men to throw rocks at us in the dark, how you burned my barn to force me off land you want to steal." Silas laughed. "Who's going to believe you? A timid little man and his Apache whore against a respected businessman? You'll be laughed out of town." Ayanna moved so fast that Silas didn't have time to react. One moment she was at the door. The next she had him by the front of his expensive shirt, lifting him clear off his feet. His face went pale. "Call me that again," she said, voice deadly calm, "and you'll discover exactly what this savage can do." Cormarmac pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "The man you sent last night. The one Ayanna knocked unconscious. He was very talkative when he woke up, even signed a statement." He unfolded the document. "Says you hired him and his brothers to harass us. Says you told them to burn the barn. Says you promised them a share of the land once you forced me out." Silas's expression crumbled. "That's nothing. One criminal's word against mine." "Maybe," Cormarmac agreed. "But I also have this." He pulled out another paper. "A letter from Catherine, the real Catherine. She wrote to me 3 days ago. Says she never received any of my letters after the first 2. Says the agency stopped forwarding them. Says when she tried to contact them, they told her I'd changed my mind." He looked Silas in the eyes. "You intercepted our correspondence, made sure we never connected. Then you sent Ayanna instead, knowing the situation would make me vulnerable." Sweat beaded on Silas's forehead. "You have no proof I did that." "I have Catherine's letters. I have your handwriting on the agency documents. I have a very motivated witness who's willing to testify." Cormarmac leaned forward. "And I have every person in this settlement watching through your window right now." Silas's eyes darted to the windows. A crowd had gathered outside, drawn by the commotion. Faces were pressed against the glass, watching everything unfold. "Here's my offer," Cormarmac said. "You sign over the deed to the water rights you were really after. You leave this territory and never come back. And I don't share these documents with the marshal 2 towns over who's been looking for evidence of land fraud." "You're bluffing," Silas whispered. But his voice shook. Cormarmac smiled. It wasn't a gentle expression. "Try me." Ayanna set Silas down, but she didn't step back. The threat in her presence was clear. Silas looked between them. He saw no escape, and something in him broke. He pulled out the water rights deed with trembling hands. He signed it over. "Get out of my territory," Cormac said quietly. Silas grabbed his coat and fled, pushing through the crowd outside. Cormac and Ayanna stood alone in the office. The deed was in Cormac's hands. The evidence of their victory was tangible. Ayanna looked at him with something like awe. "You planned all of that. You taught me that strength comes in different forms," Cormac said. "I used mine." She kissed him again, right there in Silas's office, with half the settlement watching through the windows, and Cormac kissed her back, no longer caring who saw or what they thought. They'd won, together. 2 weeks after Silas fled the territory, Cormac and Ayanna stood in front of a traveling minister. He had agreed to perform the ceremony, but not in a church. The settlement's church had made it clear that an Apache woman wasn't welcome inside their walls. So they stood in the open air on Cormac's land. The creek ran behind them. The rebuilt barn stood as a testament to what they could accomplish together. There were no guests, no family, just the minister, visibly uncomfortable but willing to take their money, and the two of them facing each other in the afternoon light. Ayanna wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Cormac had bought in town. It was pale blue, modest. When she'd first put it on, she'd looked at herself in the small mirror with an expression of wonder, like she'd never imagined herself as a bride. Cormac wore his best shirt, the one he'd been saving for the day Catherine arrived. It felt right, somehow, using it now for the woman who was supposed to be a mistake but had become everything instead. The minister rushed through the words. He clearly wanted to finish and leave. When he reached the part about objections, he didn't even pause. He just kept reading. Cormac barely heard the words. He was too focused on Ayanna's face. On the way, her eyes stayed locked with his, on the small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Do you take this woman to be your wife?" "I do," Cormac said, and his voice didn't shake. "Do you take this man to be your husband?" "I do," Ayanna answered, and there was a certainty in her tone that made Cormac's chest tight. They had no rings. They couldn't afford them after rebuilding the barn, but Ayanna had woven 2 bracelets from leather and horsehair. Simple, strong. She tied one around Cormac's wrist. He tied one around hers. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said quickly. He was already gathering his belongings. He left within minutes, taking his payment and his discomfort with him. Cormac and Ayanna stood alone beside the creek, married, committed, bound to each other in the eyes of whatever law still mattered out here. "So," Ayanna said, looking down at him with that same gentle expression she'd worn since the night she first kissed him. "What now?" "Now we build something," Cormac said, and together they did. Over the following months, the ranch transformed. Ayanna's strength meant they could tackle projects Cormac had thought impossible. They built a new corral for the horses. They expanded the pasture. They even started planning a larger house. Cormac's knowledge of the land and his patience with the animals meant they prospered in ways that surprised them both. The settlement never fully accepted them. Some people crossed the street when they saw Ayanna coming. Others whispered behind their backs. But there were a few, a small handful, who saw what they'd built together and recognized it for what it was. Strengthened partnership, love in the most unlikely form. Catherine sent a letter 6 months after the wedding. She'd married a banker in the East. She was happy. She wished Cormac well. He read the letter once, and then he burned it. That life, that version of himself who'd needed someone small and gentle to make him feel adequate, was gone. The man he'd become was standing beside a woman who could throw him over her shoulder if she wanted to. A woman who relied on his intelligence and gentleness as much as he relied on her strength. That was someone he actually liked. Ayanna found her place too. Not with her tribe, not with the settlement, but here on this land, with this man who saw her not as too much of anything, but as exactly right. They stood together one evening, watching the sunset over the territory they'd fought to keep. Ayanna's hand rested on Cormarmac's shoulder. His hand was on her waist. The height difference that had once seemed like an impossible barrier now felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "That I wasn't Catherine?" Cormac looked up at her, at the strong lines of her face, at the eyes that had seen him truly from the very beginning. He smiled. "Every day, I'm grateful you weren't." She leaned down and kissed him, gentle and sure. And in that moment, with their ranch thriving and their future spread out before them like the open territory, Cormarmac Holloway finally understood what it meant to belong, not to a place, not to other people's expectations, but to each other, and that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where unexpected encounters change everything. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like this one.